Hello, good afternoon. This is June 9th, 2013. I'm your host, Kari Ilonummi, and this is a NoSpinNewsSource.com monthly report for this month, for June. Now, as you see, we're not in the studio today. We're out and about. We're out here at a old abandoned farm post. Once upon a time there were cows here. There was money being made, business, kids coming down here after school and enjoying nature and purchasing snack items from the store on the other side, the farm store that used to be abundant. So today, since we have nice weather here in the Pacific Northwest, just Seattle greater area, I decided we would go outside the studio and enjoy a little bit of the circumstances and nature. Now, today we're going to have a heart-to-heart talk. We're going to be talking about farms as we're here on the farm, or what used to be one, the skeleton of what remains. And we're going to be discussing a whole lot of other issues, from what would be Associated Press, having whistleblowers and actual employees and journalists wiretapped illegally by the NSA and Justice Department, and a whole bunch of other factors. You may have been hearing about all the scandals in the news with what would be President Obama. And it seems like one scandal after another, ever since Benghazi, it's really all fallen apart now. And even, as discussed by what would be WorldNet Daily, now the birther issue is back regarding the legitimacy of what would be the birth certificate and of this president. And supposedly that what would be Social Security number was issued to someone not born in Hawaii, but born out of Connecticut, which brings things into question as well. But we're not here to talk today about what would be the birth certificate. We're here to talk about other issues. Now, in Benghazi, remember the testimonies of what would be such folks as former Secretary of State Clinton. And what did Hillary Clinton state? What difference does it make, unquote, regarding if there were the circumstances of security and what was going on with Benghazi in September 11th of 2012, which resulted in the death of Ambassador Stevens. So, right now, let's take a look at the footage of what would be Secretary of State Hillary Clinton stating on the record before Senate hearings, what difference does it make?
Or was it because of guys out for a walk one night who decided they'd go kill some Americans? What difference at this point does it make?
Now, on the aspect of the farm and farming, today I'd like to discuss GMO, genetically modified organisms, something in which I've discussed over the years, and today we're going to discuss now. One of the Frankenstein type creations of Monsanto, what would be genetically modified wheat, which has not been sold on the market legally in the United States, has been discovered at a farm in Oregon. Somehow, from what would be the 1998 through 2005 experimental studies that they did, somehow some of this pollen has ended up in a field many miles away and has polluted with genetic pollution a field in Oregon, and possibly up to 15 other states. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has acknowledged this. This is a very scary situation. This is going to hurt what would be farmers, our economy, and the wheat market in general across the United States, is now in an element of uncertainty is going over the planet, as countries such as Japan has now stated that they will refrain from any purchasing and remaining of any contracts of what would be wheat purchasing and importation of wheat by U.S. farmers into their country for import from the United States. So this is a beginning of a very sticky and hardcore situation. It's horrible that they are polluting our planet with this genetically modified material. Then what happens when a farmer ends up discovering, or the courts end up discovering more like it, that under the circumstances a farmer has polluted what would be material or corn in which has been pollinated with a genetically modified element? What happens from this? They could be sued in the court of law under the circumstances, and the reason why is because there is patents on what would be these genetically modified organisms that they create. So with cross-pollination, if a farmer's field is pollinated hundreds or whatever miles away, even against their will, you would think the farmer could be able to sue Monsanto, but no, Monsanto could sue you because they consider it almost the same thing as making a replica of a DVD or a CD and selling them off. Instead of going to Ozzy for the brand new Black Sabbath album, you can get it for $15, you can get it, you know, whatever, for $7.95 or something like that, if somebody was doing that type of a deal. So they're acting as if the farmer's the criminal when the farmer is not. This is a real hairy situation. Now, on the aspect of what would be Obama, I've discussed for quite some time that he's most likely looking at impeachment, and if he doesn't, this country is screwed, simply put. I've referred to him as Black Bush. It's the same policies as Bush, continued out. What I find interesting is how many people are in denial. They say it's similar to the policies of George W. Bush and Dick Cheney that are panning out and playing out now under the Peace Prize President of Barack Obama. Change we so-called can't believe in. People say, well, there's similarities. But when I say it's white Bush, black Bush, we're still staying the course. A lot of people draw back and say, whoa, I don't know about that now, Kari. Well, guess what? I do know about that. I know all to do about that. While most people might get 5 or 10 minutes of a newspaper or this or that, a little blip of some news thing that they go to, this is my lifestyle and I do this all the time. Look at the Twitter and Facebook post all the times of day or night. Look at what I'm doing. This is a lifestyle. I was just at an interview recently, and you'll get to hear about this and actually hear the interview directly here on the website nospinnewssource.com in today's monthly report out of what would be Blog Talk Radio from San Jose, California. It was a 1-hour-long interview. It's supposed to have been 30 minutes. It ended up being an hour. Very action-packed and a whole lot of information. So today, that's one of the main focal points, along with today's discussion, which is a heart-to-heart chat right here on this farm. So Obama is in trouble. It's a good thing. But the question is what are you going to do? Are you going to start looking of, okay, what are we going to find next for the next presidency for 2.5 years from now? Are you going to do that for 3.5 years from now? Are you going to be looking for that? Or are you going to deal with the situation that's in office and be responsible right now? That's the question. And that's going to be a very interesting, decisive element. So we have even folks like Glenn Beck bringing comparisons, drawing comparison lines with Obama to that of Adolf Hitler. It's at that point now. Now, I've never said that I'm a 100% Glenn Beck supporter. I have gave him credit on bringing certain things to the forefront that most journalists won't discuss. I give him credit for that stuff when he had his Fox News show and different things as well. He here or there, he did some amazing things. But there are some discrepancies I have with him as well and whatnot. One of my big discrepancies is him flat out lying about what would be Infowars.com owner Alex Jones. He did lie about Alex Jones when he called him a fascist and other names that were very derogatory and were wrong, simply put. No matter what you think of Alex Jones and Infowars.com, I have a respect and trust for what would be Alex Jones and what he's doing over there, especially after he brought on folks such as Lyndon LaRouche and other statesmen and people. He may not know, just like most of us don't really know for sure, most of us in society, what we need to do, but I do believe that's a man that's trying with his deepest intent to discover the truth and to bring that to the world. And so the intent of Alex Jones, I believe, until I have evidence to show otherwise, is that of a good person, simply put. Now, we have the lines being drawn by Glenn Beck, comparison of what would be, like I stated, Hitler to our president. This is a very profound situation. We have IRS whistleblowers and folks that have came public in testimonies even, and have stated that from the White House, from what would be the Justice Department, they were directed to discriminate and look into folks that were associated with the Tea Party group and nonprofit organizations and conservative groups. So this is a point in the situation where it doesn't matter if you're Republican, Democrat, you can hate the conservative Tea Partiers and say, good, good. Well, that's your opinion. But it's not good when the IRS is being used as a attack dog to discriminate against certain groups that some folks that are in the White House don't like. And if this was happening under the circumstances of the other way, or under a Republican presidency, or whatnot, or a Democrat rather, happening to the Democrats would be up in arms as well, understandably. So this is a situation where it's not about Republican, Democrat, it's about being American. And when we have laws that we selectively utilize and hold people accountable to here or there, but also selectively look the other way, then what respect does the rule of law have? None. So we have to make sure the rule of law has respect and integrity by living by it and going with it. So, and the Constitution is the ultimate rule of law, no matter what the Patriot Act says, no matter what anybody on states, including the Supreme Court, ruling that Monsanto is pretty much God and can do what they want, and farmers have to shut down. Now, we're at a point in the road, folks, when the rubber is meeting the road. I've been right about too many things. I've had my credibility coming together very quickly. It's very overwhelming. It's scary to see what's happening to the world around me. I'm worried about families. I'm worried about you. I'm worried about the people. That's what drives me to do what I do, simply put. Simply put. So, we're here at the situation today. Bilderberg 2013 going on, just ended today. Very interesting in what would be outside of London, which is where you have Rothschilds and major folks from corporations, ruling elites, folks from the British Empire and other monarchies and people that are a part of this that come together and decide what's going to happen with you and I and the fate of the world and business as we know it. So very interesting. And it goes against the Logan Act because you have all these dignitaries and people meeting and deciding what's going on, but they don't allow the free press in there to record, to show. That's no transparency. Barack Obama promised you change you can believe in, a transparency. Where's the transparency? He promised you what would be Guantanamo Bay was going to be shut down. It's getting ready to be upgraded. He promised you change you can believe in. He promised you that once we got past and situated a bailout or two, we'd be on our feet, and that would be the end of that, and we wouldn't need bailouts. Bailout after bailout after bailout, now we're getting ready to go bail in, which is where they come for your 401ks, your bank accounts, your pensions, what you got going. Not just the price of food's getting ready to redouble again under Barack Obama. Change you can believe it. Not just that, but it's getting ready to get a lot worse. The war situation overseas and what's happening here. We are turning into a totalitarian state. We're turning into a situation where if you blow the whistle and expose government corruption, they throw you away like Bradley Manning or other people, and they treat you as if you are doing treason and giving our arch enemy the deepest secrets like the launch codes or something. This is the situation we're in. So, here we are today. What will happen? Where will we go? The situation. This is a very interesting place in time, folks. Now, what difference does it make? As Hillary Clinton stated, what difference does it make if this president pretty much sacrificed and sent this ambassador, Chris Stevens, to the dogs to get rid of evidence that we were in bed with and working with and funding Al-Qaeda and transferring the weapons to Al-Qaeda members? Now, you remember the past when I was still a conspiracy theorist a few months back? And I was saying that the United States, several months back, actually pushing a year, that the United States, 9 months ago, technically, was funding Al-Qaeda in Syria, Libya, with what would be the overthrow of Gaddafi and whatnot. Well, guess what? Now we have folks such as Senator Rand Paul stating on the record, we are funding Al-Qaeda. Not that he supports that, but he's asking, what are we doing that? So in the past, remember, it was not Al-Qaeda. We were supporting the democratic processes of the Libyan people. And the Libyan people chose that they wanted to get rid of Gaddafi because he was so evil. That's what we were told in the media to begin with. The American people signed on and said, okay, let's support the democratic processes of the Libyan people. Let's give them what they want, allow them to do what they want. If they want to have a democratic election, supposedly. What happened? Well, that was story one. Then the narrative changes. The official story changes over and over and over again. When you're involved in media like me, and you see news stories change over the course of a day, you see news stories that you were on and looking at and reading and printing off yesterday, and all of a sudden now you go to latimes.com, the article doesn't exist. When you see things like that, or just like weather modification. This is a very interesting topic. I didn't expect to talk about that today, like HARP program or whatever, but weather modification. We have folks such as Rachel Maddow saying it doesn't exist. Shows a picture of Alex Jones with the helicopters flying over him with this kind of weird, distant look, like he, you know, took too many of his pills today or something. I don't know, you know, or whatever type thing. They make him appear that way. Not that I don't think he takes pills, I'm saying. So, but what's interesting is the United States government acknowledges that, and whatnot, such as former Secretary Gates and people of the Pentagon acknowledges that there is weather modification weapons, weather weapons. And I know personally, I remember when I was 18 years old and 9/11 first happened, and I was told, when I decided I want to start researching into politics and government, I was told, Kari, that's a great idea, but whatever you do, just stay away from those conspiracy theories. Everybody said, just stay away from conspiracy theories, Kari. Whatever you do, don't read or listen to conspiracy theories. Well, I don't know if this is because I was a young man, 18 or what, but something just made me want to just say, okay, listen, I'm going to look into some of these conspiracy theories. I'm just going to go out of the box, see what they have to say, why is everybody so scared of them, and whatnot, and see what's real, what's not, and just look through. Maybe there might be a tidbit or two of knowledge in there, you never know. And step by step, I found out sometimes there were some fragments of knowledge. And I found a lot of fluff and crap out there too, and that's another story. So you don't want to believe everything you hear or read on the internet or anything, of course. And I surely don't. But I discovered, going to the Pentagon.com website, I actually came across some stuff on the internet talking about the HARP program that's in Alaska for weather modifying and weather weapon and other programs that allegedly it does, using stuff with the aurora and whatnot, and the atmosphere and extra low frequency waves and stuff like that, that I went onto the Pentagon website and it stated in 2025 we will have the technology to control the weather. About 6-8 months later, I went back to the Pentagon website, and ever since then, when I put in HARP, there's nothing there on that. There's nothing about controlling the weather, and other key phrases and things I looked on there was not available on the internet, the Pentagon.com or whatever it is website. Very interesting. So I've seen things and change and whatever, and that there was one of the things that caught me too and said, there's something kind of weird there. And I had no idea exactly what that meant, but it did kind of allure me from within. And I had a hunch, and like usual, kind of like a good investigator, a good detective, they have a hunch sometimes, and they can smell a clue that no one else sees or understands, but they just see certain things, and they look into certain directions, and they consider things and variables other people just never consider. So, we want to close today's show up right now, but the point is this. Today's June monthly report, this month's report. Think about, where are we going? Where are you going? Is things getting better or are things getting worse? When you pick up a steak, if you can even still buy one, when you pick up a can of beans or a bag of beans, look at the price of that, the milk. Look at the quality of your foods. Look at where the quality of our nation's going. The anger. I see people when I'm out that are yelling at road workers and people that have a sign in their hand, just being mean to them. Just being real mean. I see people lashing out, doing bad things to people because they're so angry and so dissatisfied with society. Misery loves company, and they take it out on other people. It's not right. What are we going to do about this? Don't play the blame game. If you voted for Obama, then you owe it to the sake of humanity even more to make it right. Not with the next election, right now. Now check out my 60-minute long interview. I'm Kari Ilonummi, signing off with the NoSpinNewsSource.com report. And I'll show you some video footage of me and my new shotgun right now. Thank you, and I'll see you in July for the 2-year anniversary. Well, I just turned 30 years old on June 5th, and this here is one of my new presents. Got it for myself, but hey, that's okay. You gotta, do something for yourself once in a while, right? Birthday time and being 30 years old, that's a pretty amazing feat and element. So I wanted to celebrate, and I got a nice shotgun. It's a TriStar, has a nice fiber optic sight, holds 5 rounds, pistol grip, Picanti rail. I like it a lot, real nice. And what I carry on me everywhere is this right here, and something you don't see is this. It's a car, 45 with a Crimson Trace laser. Real nice hollow point shells. It's a good thing to have these days. It's called better safe than sorry. All right, well, Kari Ilonummi here. We'll see you next month at the 2-year anniversary.
Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Angels and Warriors Radio. This is the Monday night Books and Politics show, and I'm your host, David Welch. We have an interesting guest, and tonight's show might run more than an hour. Normally we get through in 30 minutes, but this should be an interesting show. Tonight I will interview Kari Ilonummi, a bright young man who plans to run for a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives in November of 2014. Kari describes himself as an economist who has accurately forecast many of the problems we are having today. In his forecast, he predicted problems such as hyperinflation, the doubling of the prices of food and fuel, erosion of constitutional rights, a growing police state here at home, and more wars overseas. Kari also warned against any bailout or austerity measures and said that 4 years ago that President Obama would bring no beneficial changes, but rather just be a continuation of the policies of George W. Bush and Dick Cheney. Now, I can't verify that he made those predictions, but if he did, he was certainly accurate in his forecast. Prices, especially energy-related prices, are certainly much higher, and our rights have been seriously eroded. We have had a bailout whose sole effect seems to have been making the big banks bigger and richer. Recent scandals in the Obama White House make it clear that he is nothing special. We have not yet had the hyperinflation Kari expects, but I'm confident it is on its way with the huge deficits we're running. In any event, speaking as a former economics student myself, I strongly believe we need more people who think like economists and far less who think like lawyers and career politicians in our Congress. Years ago, when I studied tax law, I was always amazed at the questions my fellow students asked. They were lawyers and accountants, and their primary concern and their questions, as each law was explained, were How do I fill out the form? And how do I use the law to benefit my clients? When I would ask questions like, why was the law enacted? What was the purpose? Has it succeeded? Is it fair? Both my fellow students and the instructors would simply shake their heads and stare at me like I didn't belong there. So I do believe we have a great need for people like Kari in politics. People will ask why laws are passed, and if they're effective, or if they should be changed or repealed. It's interesting to note that Kari has made considerable effort to get involved in politics. He has ran twice for the city council in Arlington, Washington, and once in 2011 for mayor. He's also active in providing news and information which informed voters can use in evaluating the performance of their elected officials. He's the owner and founder of NoSpinNewsSource.com and has reported for Alex Jones, Infowars.com. Kari is recognized as an expert in several areas and was even asked by Congressman Rick Larsen to come in to advise his office on several topics last year. Oddly enough, Rick Larsen is the congressman Kari will be running against. I take it the congressman did not follow Kari's advice. Kari considers himself to be a lover of liberty, a constitutionalist, and a patriot. He has already started his campaign for the U.S. House of Representatives in the 2nd District of Washington State, just 20 miles north of Seattle, Washington. Most important, from my viewpoint, is that he is running as an independent candidate. So in tonight's show, I hope to confirm that Kari is indeed someone we want representing us in Washington, and also to touch on the difficult question of whether he can actually get elected. Kari, are you there?
Yes, I am. Good evening, and thanks for having me tonight.
Good evening, Kari. We're very happy to have you on the show. You've heard my introduction. Is there anything else you'd like to add about yourself or your background?
Well, I do appreciate the bio. I can send you some links for some of the stuff that perhaps you may not have completely verified or this or that. And it was the 22nd of last June in which I came into Rick Larsen's office. But you were right on your assumption. Yes, while he may have got the intel and information, he did not go with the recommendations that I presented. But they were presented to him and much articles and information. So what can you do from there?
Sure. Okay, let's tackle the first and most difficult question first. Why are you running for Congress in 2014?
Well, honestly, I mean, even though I've been involved in politics and I've loved studying it and economics and why things are the way they are, and I've always wanted to contribute something to humanity, so someday when I have gray hairs of wisdom, I can feel like my life actually counted for something and it meant something for future generations, not just a waste of time, that ultimately I presented literature, emails, information, given speeches right here starting at the Arlington City Council meetings and whatnot, and provided literature to help organize these folks at the local and state, regional level in which could benefit them, their jobs, and ultimately the people. But through time, as I was organizing some of these folks, that I began to discover that I understood what would be the nature of the problem, the crisis, and the solution to a degree that the folks I was organizing couldn't begin to really contrast with, but also some of these folks besides that would not do what they should be, at least what I believe, which is enacting something and showing that they support the interest of why they should be there. They swore upon an oath to uphold the General Welfare Clause, which is defined within the preamble of our federal Constitution. So at some point I began to see the old saying kind of rang in my mind of if you want it done right, you have to do it yourself. So it would have been much easier, obviously, for the elected officials to do their job. Then I can just come to them at that point, and their circumstances are a lot easier, obviously, and much less drudgery and work under the circumstances and going through it. And since they're the elected officials, the easiest thing to do, instead of impeach them or whatever, going layer by layer like an onion, would be to first give them the intelligence and help them. But like I said, at certain points in the road, they became aware, some of these folks did, that they wanted to turn that shoulder and back to some of these policies. And on the side, they would tell me, we like what you're doing, some of them would, and say, keep doing what you're doing, including the former mayor, Margaret Larsen here. After the session, in front of everybody, she stated that she looked at me as a second son. but still she just didn't have the backbone because of the council. So ultimately, under these circumstances, step by step, I realized I'm going to have to get involved with shaping the political process. Now, I didn't intend to go as far as running for U.S. House of Representatives. I was just going to go for a city council seat. That was my intent. Honestly, U.S. House of Representatives didn't seem very appealing to me under the circumstances. So unlike a lot of these folks that are looking for a silver spoon or some kind of a opportunity, me getting into politics has been a step-by-step process of not looking to jump in there with the excitement of loving something that's going to benefit me, but it's been under pressing circumstances of feeling that I weight on my shoulders, ultimately, of the circumstances that I feel like I have to help families out there that feel at the bottom of the totem pole, disenfranchised, they don't have a voice, they're feeling the oppression, they're having to work 3 jobs just to provide diapers and half of an ends meet, the 2 meals a day type circumstances that are becoming so clear, apparent, and just common within the nation these days as the standards of living are deteriorating. And hyperinflation, we haven't hit the all-time high, but we have hit hyperinflation reflected within the price of food, fuel, and so many other commodities, the price of gold in relation to the dollar and whatnot, and the value of the dollar in the world obviously is being sold out and being viewed is not real respected these days, along with other policies that we have coming out of the executive. But ultimately, to answer your question, it's been a step-by-step procedure after what would be 2 election cycles of what would be for city council here. Then I decided to step up a notch and run for mayor. And then at one point, a store owner here in town asked me to run for Congress. At first, I have to acknowledge, I kind of laughed at him. I didn't want to go there. But through time, I felt that, like I said, I needed to step to the plate and go step by step, but I didn't want to jump to any conclusions. So this is where Rick Larsen comes into play. I've been trying to go into Rick Larson's office for years. He has not allowed that until what would be June of last year. What's funny is prior to my meeting there, less than 3 weeks prior to that meeting on June 22nd, I called and stated, due to the National Defense Authorization of 2012, with unconstitutional provisions, which takes habeas corpus, due process, and throws it out the window, as it allows people that are deemed suspects merely of potential terrorism and other crimes, that they could be thrown away indefinitely without any due process rights, like I mentioned, no phone calls home or anything, just off to Guantanamo or some secret place. So as I mentioned, that he has signed on and allowed these unconstitutional provisions and whatnot, that him, along with other things from Guantanamo Bay, other abuses, what happened in Libya, this was building the precedent that already is taking place at the UN, which is discussing with lawyers and folks in the United States, such as the ACLU, that folks are looking at a war crimes, a Nuremberg style, like after the Nazi Germany trial, tribunal for these war crimes and acts of crime against humanity of what we did with these drone strikes in Pakistan and around the world and what's going on. So it seems like a real interesting process. So these issues and whatnot were presented, and I stated this to what would be the congressional aide. They said, well, we'll put your name on a waiting list. It's very long, so on and so forth. He's busy in a re-election cycle as well. It'll probably take a year. I said, okay, put me on the list. Well, like I said, about 10 days later, I got a call from their office asking me what time is more convenient, Mr. Ilonummi, for you to come in, afternoon or morning. And it was a new tone and circumstances when all of a sudden Rick Larsen realized that Obama's in serious trouble. Circumstances with Benghazi and factors and things hadn't happened at that point yet, but obviously did later. We can go into that, and that just adds another element to this as well, which I'm sure is making Mr. Larsen maybe think twice about not listening to me, about distancing itself from what would be the Obama menace, if you will. But anyway, ultimately, under these circumstances, once I discovered that what would be Rick Larsen was not going to do what he needed to do. At this point, like I said, he wasn't taking the hand that was available, the handout and the information to heart and to utilize that, which could save himself. Because I even stated, under these circumstances, that he could really go out in front of the public, say, I made a mistake for supporting Obama. I didn't know these things. Now that I do, and take a serious step back, and most of us would not know the wiser, and he could be reelected and reelected over and over again, and if he did the right things, then perhaps some things may be able to be overlooked at some point. But when it came to the point where he knew where the corruption lied, he knew he was a part of this, and has capitulated ultimately, as he's not for Glass-Steagall, as he has supported what would be as far as I'm concerned, nearly every bad law out of the George W. Bush and Barack Obama administrations. So this is a very scary factor and circumstances. And to make it a long story short, like I said, once it became obvious, and as you mentioned at the beginning of what will be the bio of the show, my bio and whatnot, that he didn't take these recommendations. So I feel forced and pressed under the circumstances to run for U.S. House of Representatives, as I've discussed with other people of what would be perhaps a little bit more of a typical look of the gray hairs of wisdom of political figures and whatnot, some of these variables. And like I mentioned, they don't seem to understand the principles to the degree that I do. So, yeah.
Okay. Kari, in my book, Stop the Insanity Target 2014, one of the things I discuss is the problem with big banks and the need to make them smaller. I specifically recommend that we reenact the Glass-Steagall Act or something very similar. And I noticed that you've made almost the same recommendation. Could you explain to our listeners what is the Glass-Steagall Act and why is it so important to pass this legislation when many members on both sides of the House in Washington say we need to give the recently acted Dodd-Frank legislation more time to work?
Yeah, I think that's a good question and whatnot. Ultimately, what Glass-Steagall is, it was passed under Franklin Roosevelt's term in 1933. It was an effort that the legislation made the bank holiday and made the separation of speculation by the banks, which is known as today like the toxic debts of Wall Street, financial derivatives, hedge funds, so on and so forth. Well, this separation, this firewall that protected the banking of Main Street, which would be the chartered banking. This is the good banking, the banking that we absolutely have to keep municipalities running and whatnot in states and certain variables going at the local level, farmers having the credit for seeds and the equipment they need for the next year's sowing of the crops and whatnot, which can go up into millions of dollars for many folks and whatnot. That this makes it toward the credit, the things that need to be there, and the protection and elements of the banking is there for the people. But the Wall Street financial speculation gains, that's Wall Street. So that protection there, firewall, made it to where it's like, okay, Wall Street, this is, if it's so valuable, you get to have all this yourself, but the American people's not going to be liable for your gambling debts. So just like I can't go to one of our casinos that we have here, at Tulalip Casino or something that's here in the state of Washington, I can't go there, gamble off my next month's rent and expect someone or taxpayers to pay my rent if I was silly enough to play roulette at the table. That ultimately it's the same circumstance here. So what happened was it worked perfectly for 65 years. There were some erosions and little games behind the scenes unofficially through former Fed Chairman Greenspan and whatnot, but it didn't officially completely get dismantled until 1999 under Bill Clinton. Once this happened, we saw what led to the 2007 beginning of the collapse of the economic situation with the subprime mortgage sector, which was the weakest link to this, and then we've seen what would be the beginning of bailout after bailout after bailout, and no matter how much duct tape they put on the boat, it's not going to work out. And one thing that needs to be addressed as well is these so-called toxic gambling speculative debts, financial derivatives as it's referred to, is estimated by some economists up to $4.5 quadrillion. So it's fictitious to begin with, but also it's more than all the world's GDPs for the next half a century. So it's a debt that cannot be paid. It was intended to not be paid, and what would be the failure of our economic system is no mistake and no accident. While there are some people who don't completely understand the ins and outs of economy and what a dollar means and the value of it and the credit system and what it means to be American regarding Alexander Hamilton and the national system of banking, while people don't know a lot of the technical nitty-gritty details, they do see how this is leading to the price of their food being doubled and so many other variables that are just seemingly at the seams coming apart. And people are finding themselves saying that I never thought this would happen to me and my family here in America and whatnot. So it's fundamental for what's that?
Yeah, I mean, it seems pretty simple to me. If I take my monthly check and I go down and deposit in the bank, I expect it to be there. I expect that money to be there when I need it. I don't have any problem with the bank making responsible investments, but I don't want them gambling and speculating with my money and taking a good risk of losing it all. And to me, that's what Glass-Steagall was all about, and I think just in those simple terms, people can understand it and can realize how we've been screwed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's absolutely correct. The cities and municipalities are seeing that the only place that appears as if it's bringing a so-called financial gain is the derivative market, which this is all a joke and something to suck them in. But when it all falls apart, they're going to have obviously a very bad investment at a card game at a table they're not going to win in the long run. So yeah, for what would be, like you said, for sound investments that benefit your community, that help out and bring jobs and things that end up coming back and bringing a profit, it would make sense, and that's what the bank's supposed to do, is to lend that out. But with all these bailouts that were supposedly in the interest of Main Street, supposedly going to free up the credit for that farmer, for the shelves on the stock at Safeway, for Main Street and jobs to be created, we've discovered that this money has not went for that at all, as typified by J.P. Morgan Chase and Bank of America and others. So too big to fail banks have actually taken the precedent, and we've even seen under the Eric Holder that none of these people will be prosecuted, and that's what we've seen. So so-called change we can believe in is more like white Bush, black Bush. We're still staying the old course. And what Dick Cheney and folks wanted for war and taking over of Libya and these other places that they could never do, privatization of Social Security and things they could never do, and different things, seems to be just flying through full speed ahead on the Obama freight train. And folks such as Secretary of State, the new Secretary of State, Kari, and other folks would have never allowed and capitulated to stuff like this in Libya under George W. Bush. But now it's a different circumstance. And we see the same things with Joe Biden and even Bill Clinton. These folks are just, I mean, it's amazing. It seems like it's different when it's our party in office. And that's one of the factors that led me to also want to go independent, which I'm sure you'll be asking more about in a minute.
Sure. Now, so what's going to happen if Glass-Steagall was not re-implemented?
Well, if Glass-Steagall is not implemented, it's only going to go from bad to worse, the financial, political, economic situation. There is no ifs, ands, or buts. You did also mention about giving the so-called Dodd-Frank bill time to work, as some people in D.C. are saying that we need to do. But it doesn't work. We've tried it. We were told the first bailout was going to do it. We were told the second one. We were told these so-called job stimulus and QE this and that. They have all these terms and technology and little names and little things behind the scenes that were technically bailouts too, but they never did benefit. They're saying to keep doing the same process, keep pumping cancer into the body, when I would think that you'd want to cure yourself of a terminal cancer. So doing the same old thing over and over and expecting a different result, they say is the definition of insanity, and it would apply here. So there is actually a huge growing resonance for Glass-Steagall right now, not just ending the Fed, but regarding the Glass-Steagall Act, which would end the Fed, as we would replace that with the National Hamiltonian Banking Credit System, but that's the second step. But what is House Resolution 129, which has 83 co-sponsors right now, which is a bipartisan effort. It was brought onto the floor the very first day of the House this year by what would be Democrat Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur was a co-sponsor, and Republican Walter Jones. So this is a bipartisan effort and a huge variable. Now, we both know a lot of stuff being of the people come onto the House, but they never have a Senate bill. Well, just as of 2 days ago, what would be, we have Senate Bill 985 was introduced. So this has totally changed the whole paradigm in Washington, D.C. Many representatives are coming out and saying we need a separation of the banking, and all of a sudden, as you know how these politicians can be, they can be very opportunistic. And as they see the Obama train going down in smoke, or the equivalent of the Titanic with all these Benghazi Gate and other scandals coming out, we could see many of these politicians acting a little bit more, say, constitutional, if you will, as it's going to benefit them as they see themselves not wanting to go to the same chopping block and potentially down up in smoke in a situation of impeachment and maybe imprisonment, as I mentioned earlier with that Nuremberg-style trial, because someday there's going to have to be accountability for what we've done overseas and other places. When you look at what would be, there's places of Iraq right now where you have 50% of the children being born with medical deformalities due to depleted uranium and other things that have been done there. So someone's going to have to pay the piper for that, and those things have to come down and play. And if we want other countries to begin to respect us, as you probably heard about the whole CIA thing in Russia, they find that once again we're infiltrating them. We have the CIA chief over there trying to get people of their government to give classified information, and step by step. So what we're doing is we're thwarting off what could be our allies, and we're turning them into potential enemies. And the last thing America wants is a thermonuclear World War III showdown with Russia and China. We want to be friends with them. We don't want problems. It's a lot more profitable and better for the economies and everybody, for the future of humanity, to get along with one another around the world and make money, not make war.
Okay, going into a little more on economic issues, and a little bit outside the U.S., I suppose, the European Economic Community has had a lot of problems recently. We've all read about it, and it's been a big problem on world markets. Could you tell our listeners what happened in Cyprus with the banks?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is we hear about, just like they told us, everybody needs a bailout. We were told that we had to take the bailout. It was fundamental. Without it, everything would collapse. So given to these austerity elements within the bailout, and everything would somehow just be like Wizard of Oz and work its way out. So Cyprus was told this too. They gave up a bunch of their gold and a lot of things. But what's different is about this was it's not just a bailout. This was the beginning, what I believe, and what some folks in what would be the European Union are beginning to say is going to set the precedent, the beginning for the world system as such. But what they did was something called a bail-in mechanism, not a bail-out. So instead of saying, okay, we are going to take out this debt, this much credit, we are going to supposedly help out what would be the interest of the people and do our fair share and whatnot, and that's going to benefit us over time. What they do, and take that debt on and pay it off over time. It's not that being done. It's directly the banks were shut down, and a huge portion of the finances of the actual bank holders, shareholders, people who owned and had savings accounts, a huge actually tapped into and taken. So this is a very different situation. So this is where the bank shut down one day, and you can't get any money. Well, they were able to get, I believe, I can't recall, they were able to get a small amount of money per day, but it was very, very small portion during this, and it was only through ATM aspects. And so that was obviously limited when you have the whole country trying to get their money out. So you had what would be a huge chunk of people's prosperity, wealth, gain, retirement, and everything that was tapped into and literally stolen. So this is the too big to fail system of Wall Street and the international banks, because we're all connected. It's all one system, and this is a terminal issue, and once it goes viral, it's going to affect the whole world, starting in, which I labeled at the podium at the Arlington City Council last September at the City Council meeting. I said that it will start in Europe, it will begin there, and within it may be weeks, it may be months, but it will not be years before it does come over and affect us here. So there are several other banks that are discussing potential bail-ins, and obviously we see more bailouts and collapse of banks, not just here in the United States, but discussing over in Europe. So it appears there's some markets here in the United States, because Europe is collapsing so heavy, it appears as if we're being propped up a little bit. There are some things that appear to have a little gain. And, of course, you hear the stock market's at an all-time high. That's interesting, and people find that difficult to understand when schools don't even have the money for buses, and firefighters and police are being cut out of the budget, but we're being told the stock market's at an all-time high, and everything is hunky-dory.
So let me get this, see if I got this right, Kari. Let's say that I have $10,000 in the bank, and our government decides that, we have so much government debt, and that's true, and we owe trillions and trillions of dollars, and we owe it, a lot of it, to big banks that have loaned the Fed or the government money, and they decide, well, we can't pay our federal debt, and if we don't pay it, these banks are going to go bankrupt, and they're too big to fail. So what we're going to do, we're going to shut down all the banks for a day or two or a week, and we're going to take some of the money from people. And in my case, I got $10,000 in the bank. They shut down, and they say, David, we've decided to take $5,000 of your $10,000 so that we can pay down our debt, our government debt, which is on your behalf, to the big banks so they don't fail. So they would just take my money, and that would be it? That's what we're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying right now. As preposterous and out there as that sounds, that the money that you have in your bank, that your potential 401k, your retirement, or whoever's, it's so unfathomable and unbelievable that could be taken and looted, so-called legally. This is a highway robbery. This is a bank robbery.
That is
legally.
That is literally what they did in Cyprus?
That is literally what they did in Cyprus, and there are folks within, like I said, the European Union that stated that this is going to be the world template, was the exact quote used by one of the finance ministers over part of the European Union, and I can get you an article, a link to that later tonight.
It's scary, isn't it?
It is, really, and it's inevitable. They're telling us it's coming and whatnot, and it's as if this is a test, and if the Americans don't pass Glass-Steagall and put this in check now, then it's going to roll on to us as well. Just like we allowed Guantanamo, we allowed the abuses overseas, and now look at what we're seeing. TSA pat-downs at not just the airports, but even at what would be high school proms, musical events, train stations, and it's going further and deeper, literally, in what would be the intrusiveness of what they're doing, NSA spying and what have you.
And so many of the people that we have in Congress today are, even if they're good intended, they're stupid or ignorant or what, I don't know. I understand that when the bailout bill was passed a few years back, that the representatives from the Treasury Department, the Federal Reserve, went to Congress and they explained that it was to help the homeowners who were facing default, and that the housing prices had collapsed, and that this bailout was necessary to save them. But within a week of the bill being passed, it was changed to become a bailout for the big banks, and that the less than 1% of that money has actually gone to benefit mortgage holders in the country who were underwater. But the Congress somehow believed what they were told and then didn't react when it was changed. I mean, that's explained in a book called Bailout by a guy named Neil Barefsky, who was actually the one of the big wigs. He was the Inspector General of the bailout process, and he just wrote how corrupt the whole thing was, and he blamed both the Democrats and the Republicans.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, so we would wonder, after being told that, even after people that after they were mistaken once, say for the ignorant ones, how and why could they capitulate to doing it again and again as we see the process that's unfolding? Things are not getting better, they're getting worse.
So clearly a reason that we need independence in Congress. If there's any listeners who would like to call in and ask Kari a question or make a comment, please feel free to do so. I think the number is on your screen if you're watching. The number is area code 949-534-0604. We'd certainly like to try and answer your questions if you have any. Meanwhile, Kari, you've demonstrated your knowledge of an interest in financial interest, and I'm sure that you could do a much better job as a congressman than the vast majority of people now in Washington. There's no doubt in my mind about that. But let's talk about something that's important, about getting elected. I understand you plan to run as an independent in a district with a heavy Democratic registration and a strong incumbent Democrat. Do you believe you have any chance of winning?
Yes, absolutely, and it's a good question. Ultimately, we see what would be, back to Congressman Rick Larsen, in his 7th term, 13th year right now. He does have a strong entrenchment in the community. The Democrats do tend to sweep the election cycle. So having an independent or someone of newer blood into the scene, what would be the chances of getting elected? And that's a good question. Well, normally, if things aren't getting bad, if things aren't becoming upsetting, people tend to not change their course of life. They tend to just go with what they go with and do the same old, same old. But it's not until times that become pressing. It's not until folks that they thought were serving the better interest or this or that, that they become aware of certain things that are happening and they really look at the bigger picture. And in these times, people are beginning to already, after they just reelected him 6 months ago, this is what I'm already hearing, beginning to think about things twice, beginning to wonder, is this guy really the best thing for us? And his track record and voting and things that are coming out and whatnot as well, and step by step. So I think it's, do I have a chance of winning this election? Absolutely. I think it's not a matter of really if. I think it's a matter of when. The question is things going to fall apart to that degree over the next year and a half, being in one of the more wealthier parts of the nation, as I'm not living in Detroit or Terre Haute, Indiana, or something like that, that's really feeling the burn, where we have many dairy farmers and people literally committing suicide every day, pretty much, and whatnot. We still have a lot of wealth and the industry and businesses, from tech to other factors that do keep things a little bit more afloat here. So it's not a matter of if, I think it's a matter of when. If I was running in those other places, it probably would have forced me to run for Congress by now. So I really feel if, under the circumstances, I did not win in a year and a half, I think that it'll be one of those I told you so scenarios, and he will be pretty much ran out of office, not by me, but by the people, with pretty much pitchforks, as they will be very upset as they're going to become more and more as they realize what his policies have done to them. And I guarantee it. I mean, like right now, things aren't maybe bad enough to dismiss him from office, but once that systemic bail-in mechanism rather comes to the United States and folks lose their 30-year retirement 401k or what they were 4 years away from acquiring, all of a sudden that guy that they love so much is going to be the one that all of their hatred is going to be going out to lash out. And you know, under those circumstances, when people dislike whoever's in office, what do? They try to find the most out there guy or woman that's against them. That way they can defeat the interest of whoever is that incumbent. So folks like Rick Larson is already on his way to prison.
The problem is that, already Congress has something like a 10% approval rating. People in this country know that Congress is not doing the job, but somehow people always think their congressman is the exception. And it's so hard to get over that. It's such a high re-election rate of totally incompetent people. It's pretty scary. Now, I do notice that Washington State has a rule, which California just recently enacted, where the top two vote getters in a primary face off in a general election. So if you can defeat whoever the Republican candidate is, it would be you against Larson in the general election. Do you have any idea who was going to be running as Republican, and do you have a plan to defeat him or her?
Well, whoever would be taking that place, yes, I would obviously have a plan to defeat him or her. Nobody has officially stepped to the plate and put out any publications locally, online, or anything that I am aware of to date. So I'm not for sure if the Republican candidate that ran last year against Rick Larson will be that individual or who will be stepping in to fill those shoes. But I am aware of this. Ultimately, we have seen for the first time when we look at these last two election cycles versus in the past. We look at the past, Rick Larson would have a sweeping, a lot of times 60, 70% total of the vote, super majority, very strong. But when we look at what would be going to the 2010-2012 elections, we began to see a slacking off. We saw one opponent, what would be John Koster, be within, I believe it was 6% of him, which is obviously a huge difference than what he was accustomed to before, what would be Rick Larson, no competition. And in this last campaign, which a different person came into play to run for the GOP position, Republican Party. He acquired, I believe it was 33%. So there is a growing sentiment against Rick Larsen. I noticed campaign signs destroyed and painted and this and that for the first time ever that I've ever remembered in the past. As you mentioned, he's been a very strong incumbent, very well loved. But I do believe many of these people in D.C., and including what would be specifically Rick Larsen, their head is so far in the clouds, they think that they are untouchable. They think that they can't be touched. So for them to imagine their lifestyles going from whining and dining at the White House places on Capitol Hill to being in a prison cell, spending their last days through this Nuremberg-style element of justice that is bound to come sooner or later, that this is so out there for them that they can't imagine it. Kind of like the people listening right now saying, there's no way my 401k could be taken away after 20 years of working at the hospital or whatever. But it's one of those things. Once it happens, if they wait to that point, it's gone. So I'm hoping we can enact Glass-Steagall and do the things in protectionism now so we don't have to get hit by the Greyhound bus before we can realize we might want to get out of the way.
It seems to me that your first priority right now, today, going forward, is to make sure you get to the general election. So you need to really be going to people who are Republicans, explaining you're not a Republican, you're an independent, but you're a heck of a lot more conservative and reasonable and a lot better for their interests than Rick Larsen, and that, you know, if you can have the Republicans behind you as well as the independents, that you can win. And so that needs to be your priority. Make sure you get to the final round. You got to win. You got to defeat the Republican in the first round. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. I agree. And I'm not just going to Republican-type conventions and events in the area. I'm also going to the Democrat side, too, because a lot of these folks, even on the Democrat side, really are starting to lose faith and content, and they're looking for something a little better, if not a lot better. So step by step, like you said, the Congress has a 10% approval rating, and that's a reflection right there.
Yeah, and the media might be more and more open with this AP scandal, from the Obama administration, and they're starting to be maybe not quite so liberal, realizing that they have a lot to lose. What do you believe are the top 3 issues in your district, and what are your positions on those issues?
Okay, well, the economy, first and foremost, because an economy that spirals out of control doesn't just cause people to lose fortunes and starve here, but they can also lead to desperation that leads to wars and potentially a world war. So economy is one of those things that we have to take care of. So with the economy, we got to think about Main Street, business. Families are hurting out there. So we got to pass the Glass-Steagall Act, which stops the hyperinflation, but that only stops the falling process. That doesn't begin to rebuild, because once Glass-Steagall is enacted, there's no capital, including those phony derivative debts that don't even are very fictitious within themselves. Those don't even exist. That 1% that's going back, like you mentioned, to the streets, that all of a sudden doesn't even exist anymore. So what are we going to do then? Well, we got to go back to, obviously, what would be the Constitution regarding reenacting Alexander Hamilton's national bank credit system, commonly known as the American System of Political Economy, which cancels out this fictitious, too-big-to-fail banks, putting American citizens back to work in the long run from the credit that we can enact and do with this. We want to shut down the Fed, but many of the folks, such as Republican Ron Paul and others, don't say what they're going to replace it with. So that there is one of those things. We don't want to see the vacuum like we do or did in what would be places like Egypt, where we took out Mubarak, and then what happened? You have al-Qaeda-linked subgroups, Anwar al-Sharia, and places like people like that taking over and making things even worse. So we have to have something to put in government if we're going to take out what's existing that's there, and that's a fundamental process. So too often we get caught in the hysteria and anger. We're upset with Larsen. We're upset with this person or that person, so we just vote them out of emotion, but we don't have a viable solution to replace it. So sometimes those other candidates that do get voted in really are no better or even worse than the old one, but people get so tired with the old ones. So I believe that if we do, like I said, go back to this, we have the credit, we have the abilities. Also with Glass-Steagall, the bailouts don't meet a Glass-Steagall banking standard. So you're talking approximately $20 trillion get brought back just like if it was a transaction of a terrorist organization or a drug dealer overseas or whatever, those funds get frozen and taken. So that money comes back. So before we get too deep into the credit system, we have $20 trillion right there as a beginning patch to keep what would be Main Street up and afloat and going, and municipalities going, firefighters and police and whatnot on the payrolls, and as a temporary method. And then we go to Alexander Hamilton's, as I said, credit system. From there we can go into NWAPA, huge infrastructure projects, and put America back to work. Now that's the first element. Second thing is this: we want to end these wars. We want to bring back. I want to bring back our troops. We have disgraced our nation. We have disgraced a lot of things, and it's really sad under the circumstances. Many of our soldiers are put in places they don't want to be in and they shouldn't be in, and we have an all-time suicide rate within the armed services. And I was aware of last couple of months we've had a higher rate of suicides of what would be troops in Afghanistan than we do of actual American troops being killed by the enemy Taliban. So when we're murdering ourselves off quicker than the enemy can get us, that might be a reflection of something that's not working out too well. So no humanitarian regime change. This is illegal. It's unconstitutional. It goes against the Geneva Convention, and it is going to cause people like Rick Larson and many of those 10% of the representatives and whatnot that we discussed approval rating, many of these people are going to pay the piper. They've already talked about mainstream already, folks such as Dick Cheney, Bush, Rumsfeld, and others facing war crimes at The Hague. There are countries, as a matter of fact, Bush was going to travel to, I believe it was Switzerland a couple of years ago to give a speech. Well, there was a warrant for his arrest, former President George W. Bush, and just like Spain. Dick Cheney cannot go to Spain. There's a warrant for his arrest in Spain, along with other countries, and Rumsfeld too, for what would be crimes against humanity. So it's a step-by-step process. Many people out there at the bottom of the ladder feel, is justice ever really going to be served when we just see the boots of oppression coming down on us? But one thing I know about the American people is they are a sleeping giant, and there is something inherent within the genetics of us as a culture and whatnot, to where once we realize what is being done to us, once the toothpaste is out of the tube, we are going to get up and get moving. It's just too bad that it may take another Pearl Harbor type event, or as I mentioned, the bail-in of people's retirements getting taken to get people up to the point to where they're going to say, okay, Rick Larson and others have to go. So we need to collaborate, as I mentioned. No wars. We need to come back. What we're doing in Syria, what we did in Libya, murdering off Gaddafi, that is not right. And look at what took its place. Literally, Al-Qaeda. And we have. Kari, with that.
You may not know it, but my book also proposes withdrawing a large percentage of our troops currently based overseas. And Afghanistan is a place that I'm totally opposed to. I just read the other day that our total military expenditures there since 2001 is something like $590 billion. That's 30 times the annual GNP of Afghanistan. We're spending far more than that country is worth or makes every year. We could just go there and pay every young Afghan between the ages of, say, 15 and 30, we could pay them 10 times what their average national income is, and it would cost us less money if they would join our army and work for us. I mean, it's absurd. The amount that we're paying here is just so totally absurd. So I totally agree. How do you think that resonates in your district?
Well, I don't think that resonates too well. As I mentioned, there's more money in my district financially. We're not as stricken as, say, Detroit, where they're having to bulldoze buildings and whatnot because they can't even keep up with the plumbing on the streets, which is where it literally is at that point.
And the waste overseas, and there must be young men in your district that are getting killed in Afghanistan and were killed in Iraq.
Yes. Including people I went to school with, absolutely, that I'll never see again, absolutely. And that does resonate within me and friends personally on a personal, deep issue. Yes, we have bases around here, several bases, Whidbey Island, Everett Naval, and whatnot, which has submarine and two, including a high-class nuclear submarine and two warships. and whatnot. We have the base outside of Arlington here and whatnot, the huge Army base down by Tacoma and Seattle. So, yeah, obviously this is a very military area. There's those 3 districts, not the 4th one, but 3 of those are in those 3 military bases are all within my district and area. So, yeah, military is a huge issue. So, yeah, this is a huge factor. This is causing major factors, depression within the troops, and is a horrible situation. And it's only getting worse.
Most of the enlisted people in the military, I understand, were actually in favor of Ron Paul in the last election, because even though he wanted to get out of the war, because the soldiers that are doing the fighting don't want to be there. Anyway, let's move on to another issue, and I have a suggestion for something that might be helpful in your campaign in your district. Recently there was an announcement that student loan debt in the U.S. is now in excess of $1 trillion, and it's really making a big problem for the economy. The government's talking about keeping the interest rate low on student loans. They're talking about changing the law, which currently allows student debt to be student debt. Right now, if you can file bankruptcy, you cannot discharge student debt. They're going to change that so it can be discharged. But those are all dealing with symptoms, and that actually might make it harder for students to get loans. My idea is that if you can reduce the cost of a college education by up to 40%, you'll have a lot less student debt, and people will get rid of most of the problems. And I have a very clear plan on how to do that. Would that be something that voters in your district might be interested in? You say they're relatively wealthy. I'm sure they have a lot of kids going to school, a lot of kids that are picking up a lot of student debt.
Absolutely. Yeah, anybody that wants an education, and many people that don't find very many job access opportunities are saying, well, maybe in times like this I should continue my education and further my degree or this or that. So perhaps when the light at the end of the tunnel comes, I can meet the criteria to have that job once they're available and back on the market again. So, yeah,
okay,
any elements to decrease
I will send you an email with a copy of Chapter 10 of my book, which explains how we can cut the cost of a college education, a 4-year education, by 40%. And that's something that it's simple, it's easy to do. There's no real reason not to do it. So I'll send you that information, and maybe that can be part of your campaign material.
Okay, I'd be very interested in reading that.
Okay, now, one very important question. How can you convince voters in your district that an independent congressman could have any effect in Washington? I mean, if you go back there, you're an independent, the Democrats won't listen to you, the Republicans won't listen to you. You say, hey, we got to do something about Glass-Steagall. They say, Kari, go jump in a lake. We don't want to talk to you. How can you convince the voters that you would have an effect as an independent in Washington?
Well, we've seen a lot in the past when it comes to party politics being played out, that's for sure, and that is a real good question. The thing is, playing party politics, in the past, well, first of all, I live in a state where there have been more independent candidates from the local level and regional level accepted than most states in the nation and whatnot. There tends to be a little bit more of an open-minded and broader demographic of what would be folks, ethnic nationalities and different things around here. So there tends to be a little bit more of an open-mindedness toward different factors, but there are obviously people who do try to stay and stick with whatever they're loyal to this or that party. But step by step, I believe that it's once again a matter of not if, but when, as they discover that their party has let them down, as they discover that the ones that they thought was the savior of change they could believe in or this or that, once they realize, oh my God, my retirement's gone, my savings is gone, my future is gone, basically, and this is what's led me to, then all of a sudden people are becoming very, under circumstances as such, and leading up to that, before we get to that degree, people are becoming more open-minded and stepping aside and realizing, if I take the same path, I'm going to get the same results, and the direction that we've been heading in decades is a downward spiral. It's not heading upwards, it's not getting better. So, yeah.
Okay, to be honest, I can't picture, if I'm a voter in your district and you come to me and say, look, I'm going to go back there and I'm going to have an effect, and I say, Kari, you're a heck of a good guy, I really love you, I'd love to have you in office, but I just can't see you being effective. I think that's a valid reason not to vote for you. I think you need something to go beyond that. And here's my idea. One independent member of Congress cannot be effective. But if we can manage to elect 20 or 30 independents in 2014, then I'm sure you could have a huge impact. As you know, there's 435 seats in the House of Representatives. After each election, the party with the majority, that's 218 or more, forms the government, in effect. I mean, they elect the Speaker of the House, they elect all the committee chairmen, everything else. If they go back there after the 2014 election, in January 2015, they discover neither party has a majority. There are 20 or 30 independents, and the Democrats nor the Republicans, neither one of them have the 218 that they need. At that point, they have to go and negotiate with the independents. The Democrats will come, Nancy Pelosi will come, John Boehner will come, and say, hey, join our caucus so that we can form the government. That's when the independents will have a tremendous amount of power, a tremendous amount of leverage, and say, well, the Democrats say, if you join us, we'll do A, B, and C. They say, well, how about D, E, and F? And by the way, we'll get back to you tomorrow if you agree to that, because we got to talk to the Republicans later tonight. That's how the independents can have an effect. And that's really the message of my book, To Stop the Insanity 2014, is that we have to elect not one, not two, but 20 or 30 independents in 2014. And I certainly would hope that you'd be one of those guys or girls, because I think that you could help make a difference, but not by yourself, but as part of a team of dedicated independents. Does that make sense to you?
I appreciate your compliment first, and a lot of the stuff in which you stated did make sense. We would have a wonderful advantage under the circumstances that we did walk in there with, like you said, 15 or 20 seats. Even if we don't have an element where there is no majority in the House, just having a huge number would say something. But I don't think that it's just about that. I think it's really about the power of the people. While the people have been letting Washington just run their lives, once things hit, once again, the people, and we already see it, we see a revolutionary comeback where people are becoming very active in shaping policy and getting involved. And we see mainstream news ratings dropping like flies to alternative news, such as what I have at nospinnewssource.com and other places that are out there that were previously considered conspiracy theorists and silly out there ideas are starting to become addressed and whatnot. So say under the circumstances I'm the only independent that does get elected here in this next election, I think that I would have a tremendous effect no matter what under the circumstances, because I think the American people want and would trust something that's not so tied in to the system, but somebody that is willing to and potentially have the ability to help bridge that gap and do what people like Obama promised to do but never actually delivered the goods, and that is help bring people together on both sides of the aisle. And as we mentioned earlier, many of these people are very opportunistic in Washington, D.C. As they're beginning to see it is financially to their advantage and beneficial to start going with patriotic-type developments and movements, we can begin to see a huge change in D.C., and we already are beginning to see it just over the last 2 weeks on the whole atmosphere of Glass-Steagall and other elements. So things are becoming very optimistic, and I'm very optimistic about the situation.
Do you know how many independent candidates there were in the last congressional election?
That were running or actually got elected?
Yeah, that were running.
Oh, I have no idea.
There were more than 20. You know what the closest, none of them won, not a single one. 24% of the people in this country register as independents, but we have not one single independent representative in the House of Representatives. I don't know how that's representative, but anyway, you know what the closest one was?
We do have a senator, though.
Yeah, we have a senator, but he's really a Democrat, not really a independent.
That's another story. But
Yeah. But the closest guy, there was a guy in Southern California that actually got 45% of the vote. So, I think we're close, and I think that in 2014 we can do it. We may disagree. I think that it's going to take a lot more than one because that will convey the message. You're probably right. You don't have to break the majority. I mean, the Republicans have 235 right now. If you knock them down to 219, they still have a majority of one. but you got 20 or 30 independents elected, that you would get a lot of attention. The news media would give you a lot of attention, whatever. Okay. My last thing, and it's a small point, and you sent me your pictures, and I looked at that, and I mean, talking to you, you're obviously a very bright guy, and you got a lot of good ideas. You dress pretty casually, and you got a little goatee or something, and which it's no big deal, and maybe it's not a big deal in your district. I ran for Congress in 1978. At that time, I had a beard. Many supporters told me I should shave, since a clean-shaven candidate is more appealing to most voters. I didn't listen, and I didn't win, but I did get 35, 36% of the vote. And so that wasn't the only reason I lost. But I just, it seems to me, like I said, you need to go out right now and appeal to a lot of Republican voters to get to the general election. They tend to be more conservative. If it was necessary, would you be willing to, I mean, I wouldn't expect somebody to compromise principles or ethics or anything else, but something so trivial as appearance, I didn't do it, but thinking back, I probably should have. Would you do something like that if it was necessary?
Well, I think it probably depends upon where you're running under the circumstances.
Yeah. Absolutely. And as I say, I know nothing about your district. So.
Yeah, I live here in somewhat of a liberal area, the Pacific Northwest Seattle area, which is kind of a anything-goes haven and area of the nation, to where people, I've never actually ran into any issues or problems with that in general, and I don't feel that has been a problem under the circumstances. I'm kind of an eclectic guy. I mean, some days I wear a suit, and some days I'm wearing a Michael Jordan jersey or something like that on the next day, depending if I'm coming from the gym or something like that, so under the circumstances. But in an office setting and under the circumstances, then I obviously dress appropriately under the circumstances. But like I said, if people are beginning to really address the issues of what's going to put the bread, butter, and bacon back on the table, put dad back to work, put my kids through college, this and that, people are beginning to step aside from those superficial variables of does he have a goatee or not to are we going to be able to pay our rent and do we have a future?
The problem is not that most people, because if you end up losing by 1% of the vote and having made that little change would have made that little difference, you'd regret it forever, I would suspect. Anyway, let's go on. That's just something I wanted to bring up because of my own personal experience. Can you provide our listeners with the address for your webpage and any other information to allow them to keep up with your campaign plans, your news show, whatever? And I'd be happy to do that. My website is nospinnewssource.com, and my candidacy has always been, and just like what's led me into politics, it's always been about me, or it's not been about me, it's been obviously what would be about we. And one thing that I would like to address too is that while we didn't get in any independence in what would be the U.S. House of Representatives with this last election, we did see a couple of victories, one in Detroit and one in the 22nd District of what would be Texas, which was Keisha Rogers. And while they are calling themselves Democrats, they are also supporting what would be return to Glass-Steagall and many of the principles that we are about in putting Americans back to work. And they did win both of their primary elections. So this is a circumstance where there are people on all sides of the aisle to where they're going to be open-minded and there. Because, like I said, Washington, D.C. is the atmosphere that Glass-Steagall is changing. So as we get more people in there, I think it's inevitable. Well, I certainly hope you're right. And, it's been really a pleasure having you on the show. I wish you the best of luck in your run for Congress. And if my movement to elect independents to Congress in 2014 continues to build, you can be sure I'll do my best to help you get elected. I appreciate that, and thanks a lot for having me this evening. Okay. Before I close tonight, I would like to let listeners know that next week I will be interviewing Jim Kearney, a former big-time radio talk show host in Los Angeles, who's also been a television executive and an educator. Jim is most recently an author and has written a book called Mac 1, Red versus Blue. His book is a mystery detective story concerning a political assassination in New York City. There's a great deal of politics involved, so I'm sure it will be an interesting interview. Please listen in next Monday night at 7 p.m. California time to Books and Politics. Good night and the best of good health to you all.
I guarantee you, Barack Obama ain't taking my shotguns, so don't buy that malarkey. Don't buy that malarkey. They're gonna start peddling that to you. I got two. If he tries to fool my Beretta, he's got a problem.